What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with DC
KO!
and we are picking up with The Flash, the story of Wally West and Impulse, the grandson of Barry Allen in DC Comics. So, for those of you guys who need a bit of a refresher, because it's been a while since we covered this, what had gone on here was that when the DC KO event kicked off, the great big huge tournament with the Justice League and so on, that Bart Allen had the genius idea of going into the past right when DC All-In happened, when Darkseid was making his move, before he had created the Absolute Universe, and tried to stop him. Now, as you could probably expect, it didn't go very well. In fact, it went about as bad as it could get, shy of death. Darkseid was ready for him, and Darkseid pummeled them, and just sent them flying into the time stream. And so ultimately, they ended up landing in 1908. And that's when Bart Allen came across Max Mercury. Now, Max Mercury was kind of like the father, so to speak, for Bart Allen, in the sense that he was like a mentor who taught him how to be responsible, taught him how to use his powers in an effective way, and what it meant to be a superhero. Before that, he was reckless. Mark Waid's run with Impulse was phenomenal. But that's where, when Bart's talking to Max, Max says, for years, I toiled, lost, but now at last comes a reckoning, a glorious reckoning. Tell me, in your future, is his domain eternal and complete? Now, that's an important thing to establish here, because one of the other things to keep in mind is that by and large, DCKO exists in a bubble, which is to say it's not affected by changes to the time stream, but Darkseid's been changing the time stream. And so that's what's kind of been going on around everything outside of DCKO. For those of you guys who have been wondering, outside of the tournament, what does everything in the universe look like? It looks like Darkseid changing everything outside of that particular slice of time. And so that's why Bart says, my name is Bart Allen, some big scary bang in the time stream dropped me here, and right now, Max Mercury sounds really weird, saying things like Omega Speed, the unknown sacred secrets of our dark god, for it is told the Speed Force must die. Right? Now, this is completely contradictory to Max Mercury. Max Mercury is, by all standards of measurement, basically a monk. When you think about like his personality and how peaceful he is, and the fact that he doesn't really fight unless he has to, the dude's a hoss. He's an absolute demon when he wants to be, but for the most part, he's really a mentor for Bart more than anything else. And so that's why he says, once the Speed Force is dead, I will be the fastest entity in existence through the power of death, through the power of Omega. And that's where Bart says he's also got some new friends. I thought I recognized them at first, but the vibes are all off. And then he kind of fills us in a little bit. For those of you guys who aren't really familiar with Bart, he says, I was born in the future, the 31st century. Around that time, there were these pretty cool kids who got inspired by Superboy. They were the Legion of Superheroes. But I guess this Legion comes from a different world, and they think Superboy sucks, and they were inspired by somebody else. So they call themselves the Legion of Darkseid. And that's true, right? Keep in mind, this Legion of Darkseid is from the Absolute Universe in DC Comics, which is why this is a crossover. And of course, in the next issue of DCKO, Absolute Batman is going to be fighting Superman, and I'm so excited to see it. Anyway, here's the thing, right? At that point, Cosmic Boy chimes in and says, look at this little Speed Force dork. He thought he could cheat his way through time. Get one over on our Omega Lord and Master. Lightning Lad says, thanks again, kid. And that's where Saturn Girl says, whip Whirlwind, prove your loyalty to Darkseid and kill him. Now, there's a reason why she refers to Max Mercury as Whip Whirlwind. A little bit of history here. You guys are going to dig this. So most of you guys know, in publication history, the first Flash created in comic books was Jay Garrick. The second was arguably Max Mercury. Now, he wasn't called Max Mercury back then. He was actually called Quicksilver, and he was created in Quality Comics. They did almost nothing with him, right? They literally didn't explore his backstory. They never really explained how his powers work. Eventually, his super speed began to go away, so that by the time Mark Waid took over the Flash run, following Mike Baron and William Messner Loebs in the 1990s, he brought Max Mercury back and then changed his name, gave him a whole new origin story, and he could get away with it because by that point in time, Max Mercury as Quicksilver was basically an unknown. People didn't even realize he existed at all. He was that obscure. So one of the names that he had gone by way back when was Whip Whirlwind, which is the name that's being maintained here because that's the name he was using at this point in time in DC's history, 1908. And so at that point, you switch over to Wally, right? And Wally says, my name is Wally West, and I think I'm somewhere in the past. Impulse traveled through a collapsing time stream to try and stop Darkseid before he ever got started. This, as opposed to the Justice League's harebrained death tournament, right? The DCKO event, which is not harebrained at all. It's amazing. But he says, then Darkseid almost killed us. That's how good of an idea Impulse had. I have to find Bart now before he makes things even worse. But in the middle of this statement, Bart just races right by him. And he's like, a little bit of help, Wally. And Wally's like, dude, Bart, what are you doing? And he just says, I can't talk. I'm being chased. And Wally just asks, right, who are you being chased by? And that's when Max Mercury tackles him and just says, me. And so at that point, Wally says the time stream is on fire. The Speed Force is in crisis. And now Max Mercury is trying to drown me. I left him on the watchtower. What's he doing here? Right? I mean, I'd ask him, but I can't really breathe underwater. That's more Aquaman's thing. And he says, what I can do is I can move. And he says, we exit the water at Mach 12, which takes Max Mercury by surprise. Keep in mind, while Max Mercury is awesome, he's arguably one of the slowest of the speedsters, relatively speaking, right? But Wally says, I hate to say it, but Bart was right. Even with the Speed Force in pain, we're moving faster in the past due to time trappers pumping the brakes on Darkseid throughout history. So in essence, a lot of time out there is being slowed down, which for speedsters doesn't really apply. And that's why he says, but that does not mean it is my lucky day, because the Legion comes flying in and they attack Wally. And that's where Max says, they're too fast, right? They are both way too fast for me. Please enlighten me with Omega speed. And the response, you are not ready, peasant. So most likely what's happening here is that Max Mercury is just being shined on. He's being used as a henchman under the belief that some greater prize awaits him if he follows the machinations of the Legion of Darkseid. Most likely what will happen is that as soon as his usefulness has run its course, they would kill him. Right, that would basically be it. These guys are hardcore, right? They are not predicated on hope and improving the world the same way the Legion of Superheroes traditionally is. And so that's why Wally says, this has to be young Max Mercury, native to the 19th century. Darkseid must have got his hooks into his mind early, and Saturn Girl could be distorting his every single thought. Hence the reason why he's operating as a believer. He truly and genuinely believes in the cause of Darkseid, and he will not be swayed. Right? His mind seemingly will not be turned. And that's where Wally tries to ask about Omega Speed, but he's told the next big thing, courtesy of Darkseid. He's woven it into space-time itself. Surely you can feel it eating your Speed Force alive. And that's where they say, we need Impulse. He is a key conduit. He's an Allen, one of those named by Darkseid to be cold in his conquest of the Speed Force. He needs to be caught before he can wreak further temporal damage. And that's where Max just says, I told you, the boy is too fast for me. Something quickens him even more. And that's where they say, get her. And the statement's made, she's already on her way. And so when Impulse is moving as fast as he can, he just says, what's going on, right? What's wrong with the Speed Force? It's like it's screaming. And he says, I don't want to fight Max. And the reason why is because Max is basically Impulse's father figure in a lot of ways. And he says, I care about him and Wally. And then he just realizes, right? He just says, man, I messed this up. I messed this all up, which that statement right there is literally the story of Impulse's life, right? Hence his namesake. He's young, he's reckless. He doesn't really think about the future consequences of his actions. He is forever living in the moment. And so that's when he just looks up and he says, that guy's hat, right? It's so old and it's got a cool mustache. Then he looks at the train and he realizes it says Trans-Siberian. And so he's like, okay, I guess I'm in Siberia. But the reality here is he's hit immediately by someone else who stops him dead in his tracks, which is no small thing, right? The ability to stop a Flash, right? A speedster right where they are before they can even move an inch. That's huge, right? That's massive. And this girl just says, you are nowhere, bud. And that's what he just says. Remember when I told Ira that I didn't really know how to drive a car? Well, that's because I failed driver's ed. He's like, I mean, most of high school sucks. It's boring, it's slow, but driver's ed was the worst. And he says, I do remember the part about head-on collisions, like how they're really bad. And that's what this woman says. Come in, Legion. This is excess. Bart Allen is down. Now, excess is Jenny Ognatz, I think is how you pronounce her last name. I've never been able to pronounce it effectively, but basically she comes from the same time period as Bart. The two of them are cousins, that when Barry and Iris ended up, in the future, they had the Tornado twins, right? They had Dawn and Dawn. And then Dawn and Dawn had kids of their own. And so that's how you get Impulse and Ginny. Ginny's very, very fast, right? In fact, she didn't really have her powers originally when she was born. Instead, they activated at a future point in time when her father, I think, was in danger or being robbed or something like that. It's been a long time since I've read up on the history of Ginny. So just know that her powers developed later on in life when she was young, right? As opposed to like being born with them in the same way that Impulse was. But what's important here is that at that point, the Legion of Darkseid responds, and Max Mercury, still dealing with Wally West. The conversation is interesting here because Wally tries to talk sense into Max Mercury. When Max says, "You don't know me, stranger," Wally just says, "Yes, I do, right? You're one of my closest friends. Max, you have to listen to me. This is not you. All of this is wrong." And Max just says, "No, it is you who is wrong. Speed is the quest. It is the sacred truth, but your speed is corrupt, inadequate, and dying. His speed, Omega speed, is the true speed, the one speed, all speed entirely," and just clocks Wally West. And he says it is to be respected, for it is he, the one, the absolute. And then at that point, Wally's just like, okay, cool. So then he just races off and ends up snatching one of the rings of the Legions of Darkseid. And he just says, the Dark Legion ring, right? I am betting these function similarly to the Legion rings that I know. Combined with the Speed Force and the boost I'm getting from the Time Trapper, I should be in for a pretty good time. And he says, but damn it, we have to be more careful. Sounds like Darkseid's trying to replace the Speed Force with some kind of Omega upgrade. The big guy wants to control time itself, no matter the cost. And if Bart or I upset things any further, we risk destroying reality. And he says that kid is a bull in a china shop, and he's always moving. Now, here's the important distinction to understand here. Darkseid, in some capacity, either neutralizing or replacing the Speed Force is paramount here, because as a lot of you guys who are familiar with the Flash mythos know, different people tap into the Speed Force in different ways, right? Wally created it, it permeated throughout the time stream, the Speed Force exists throughout the entirety of the multiverse, and while the rest of the multiverse is technically locked off from the main DC universe, all it really means is that the main DC universe cannot enter into the multiverse, but Darkseid seemingly can, and is ultimately using it as a way to enter into the Speed Force and replace it. But the reason why that's so incredibly important is because so long as there are speedsters who can access the Speed Force, they can, number one, exist outside of space and time, and number two, jump through the time stream, which ultimately makes them the most credible threat to Darkseid. And so in knowing that, the question really has to be asked here, where's Reverse Flash? Like, where's Eobard Thawne in all of this? That's the question I have. Like, I really hope he shows up, because I have to imagine Eobard Thawne teaming up with the Flash family in order to stop Darkseid. Sounds amazing. I don't know that he would, right? But at the end of the day, Eobard Thawne doesn't like serving anybody if he doesn't have to, and especially someone like Darkseid. Unless I missed something. Unless he's dead. I guess maybe he is dead. I'm not as caught up on the Flash comics as I should be. But now here's a funny thing. When you switch back to Bart Allen, right, to Impulse, and he finally comes to, right, after having crashed into Ginny and kind of being knocked out for a moment, or at least having the wind taken out of him, he tries to run again and immediately runs into her, like she's some kind of a wall. And she just says, sorry, the light is still red. And when he looks at her, he's like, cousin Ginny? And she just says, I have no cousin. My only family is the Legion. My master named me Excess, the Legion's living embodiment of Omega speed. And he's like, what? Like, what the heck is Omega speed, right? It sounds kind of dumb. And she just says, right, it puts your Speed Force to shame, and it makes me the fastest person in existence. And like Impulse just takes off the other direction. He literally bails before she can even finish that sentence. But she catches up with him anyway. And she says, you want to do this in front of an audience? Fine by me. Unless you want to join us. Join the Legion of Darkseid. And one of the best things about Bart's comics is they're often told from the perspective of a teenager, right? Little thought bubbles, the way that teenagers would think them up, right? Impulse plus Darkseid equals nope. Not a chance. So at that point, Wally shows up on the scene, right? And Wally just says, come on, Bart, not on a train full of innocent people. Everyone aboard has a destination, a path that leads to the rest of their life. But I guess we're changing history today. Sure hope it doesn't destroy everything in the process. And that's where Excess says, you're the fastest one of them all. We have learned this to be true. So this establishes that Impulse is the fastest of all the speedsters throughout the entirety of the DC universe. She says, it's a new age, forget the old ways, embrace Omega, no more heroes, just power. Can't you see? Darkseid is. And then Impulse asks, what? Like, Darkseid is what? And she's like, no, Darkseid is. And he's like, I mean, what is he though? She's like, no, like, he is. Darkseid is. I love the exchange. I love the exchange between the two. But at that point, Wally shows up here and he addresses Jenny directly. And he says, but recognizes that she's from wherever the other Legion is from. Now, that's one of the other things to keep in mind here. We as the audience know that the Legion of Darkseid is from the Absolute Universe, but precious few people know that. Right? Superman knows it, Superboy Prime knows it, and of course Booster Gold knew it, and now he's possessed by Darkseid, so Booster Gold, who's possessed by Darkseid, currently knows it. But precious few people do. It's one of the things that's very easy to lose track of in the comics, is that in DCKO, most people don't know what's going on with the larger DCKO event, outside of the fact that Darkseid created the Absolute Universe, and that they have to hold a tournament in order to be able to defeat Darkseid. That's it. Right? Most of the characters don't really know what's happening here. And so that's where XS looks at Wally and just says, Wally West, Darkseid wants you dead. And he says, I bet, but tell him I said no deal. And just sends her like flying out the window. And at that point, you know, Bart's pissed, right? He's like, that's my cousin. And Wally just says, no, Bart, it's not. This is XS from Darkseid's reality. She's trying to kill us. Max is too. And now because you took the fight here, every one of these bystanders is caught in between. And she just says, she may not be my cousin, but she still looks like my cousin, and you just threw her out a window. And so at that point, the Legion is just like, kill the passengers, right? Let's just be done with it. That'll slow those guys down, because they'll spend their time trying to save passengers instead of focusing on us. It's what good guys do, and it's the good guys' weakness. But that's where you switch back to Wally and to Bart, and Wally says, listen to me, right? We have to get over 100 people off this train in the next 3 seconds. That means permanently altering over 100 courses of history, all because you had to leap into the past. And that's where Bart just says, like, we're heroes. We should change history. We should fix it. Every single bad thing. Now, this is kind of like the very nature of the problem between Bart and more traditional superheroes. With someone like Wally West, right? Wally West is what you might call a more traditional superhero, right? The good guys fight bad guys. The good guys beat bad guys. Bad guys go to jail. Roll credits. For someone like Bart, it's a lot more naive, right? Let's just go into the past and change things. But when it comes to this statement of Wally and saying that we potentially permanently altered over 100 courses of history, or we will, when we save their lives, combining that with his previous statement, I hope we don't break everything, is because Wally understands the consequences of going into the past. Which is to say, none of the people on this train seem overly important, but it's 1908. World War II, for example, hasn't even officially kicked off yet, and it could be that one of the people on this train passes a piece of paper to somebody else, that person drops the paper accidentally, and then they bump into somebody important who knows somebody who knows somebody who interacts with somebody, and it creates a chain of reactions that leads to some significant battle in World War II being won by the Allied forces, which turns the tide of the war, and it prevents Germany and the Axis powers from seizing control of the world. That's what you're talking about here, right? When you're talking about going into the past and changing things, it's not always about going into the past and just saying, like, let's stop this, like, dictator in Germany from rising to power, kill him in his bed when he's a baby. No. Sometimes it's just a person who knows a person who knows a person, and taking that one person off that course suddenly changes the whole course of history. Chain reactions matter. And so in the face of this, when the Legion shows up and attacks everyone, they just say, light them up, right? Electrocute the entirety of the train. And that's where Wally just says, they're going to electrify the train, right? Get your hands and your feet in the air. But no one on this train speaks English. It's a Siberian train. And so Bart actually starts speaking in Russian and just says, danger, hands, feet, air. And people start to realize what he's saying once they start, getting past their own fears. And they all raise their hands and feet in the air as an electric current flies through the train. Now, how it is the electric current doesn't go up into the seats and electrocute them anyway, I don't entirely know. Probably just the material in the seats. But what matters is this. Wally grabs one of their bags and just throws it at the Legion, right? And just throws them off guard for a moment. And then realizes that Bart speaks Russian. And Bart's just yeah, I was really bored on the watchtower that I just speed read through a whole bunch of language dictionaries. And so he just says, get all these people off the train, right? Like, talk to them in Russian and get them off the train. And in fact, Wally says that, right? We do it in 2 seconds, not 3, because despite it all, Bart and I work better together, but we've still got major problems because they're hanging from a train and they're about to fall and smash into the ground. More so than that, the Legion says Allens and Wes, and then they say, wait, right, that's it. I know how to grind them to a halt permanently. And he says, Imra, activate the time bubble. We are getting out of here. And the question is asked, to where and when? And that's when the statement's made, to Central City, right when the lightning struck, and Barry Allen became the Flash for the first time. And so they ultimately teleport away. And so once they crash land on the ground, right, Wally and Bart do, and the Legion of Darkseid is no longer the clear and present danger, that actually Wally kind of starts chastising Bart, right? And he says, I hate time travel. It always backfires. Why can't you ever just listen to me, right? Why can't you ever see things my way for once? And Bart just says, because I'm not you. And Wally actually backs down here, right? He says, Bart, you're right? I'm sorry, you are not me. And Bart just says, I'm not another Flash, right? I'm me. And Wally just says, yeah, I know the feeling. But the problem with this is Wally's backing down when he should be charging further headlong and saying, yeah, and the fact that you do things like this is the problem, right? Your personality, like how you act as a person and how you conduct yourself, is something that needs to be paid attention to. You can't just fly willy-nilly into the time stream. Now, of course, the reason why this story is written this way is because it's the nature of Bart, right? Bart acts recklessly. He acts impulsively. He acts and then thinks later. That's the problem with his character. It makes his story fun, right? But it presents a lot of challenges for other superheroes. The problem is that in the middle of all of this, he just says, Wally, something's not right. I don't have any more power. It's gone, right? Is the Speed Force dead? And Wally just says, no, right? I mean, I can feel it. It's hurting, but it's here. And Bart just says, not for me. And that's where he says, right? They must have changed something in the future, your past, right? We have to get to your grandfather. We have to get to Barry Allen now. Because the kicker of all of this is that in this moment, in the here and now, Barry Allen's powerless. But if they've gone to that moment in Central City and they've just moved Barry Allen out of the way or killed Barry Allen before lightning could strike, they would prevent him from becoming the Flash. But lest we forget, right? One of the things that Jeff Johns established in Flash Rebirth is that Barry Allen becoming the Flash was because of the Reverse Flash, Eobard Thawne. He engineered those circumstances to make that happen. So it's entirely possible that we're going to see Reverse Flash in the next video. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.